Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Can I give you a very warm welcome on a particularly chilly evening? It's great to have so many people here. Not many people knew where the Bridge Club is, so it's great that you've all found it. It's a really welcoming venue. It's new, it's only 4 years old, a post-quake build. And I just want to note our appreciation of the Bridge Club for hosting us here tonight. We've got a fantastic evening ahead, but before we get round to introducing our wonderful panel, can I acknowledge our Ecan people who are here? So we've got Tom Lambie, Steve Lowndes and Cynthia Roberts who are here. It's fantastic that you've demonstrated again your commitment to the issue of water by coming along. And we've got Councillor Phil Clearwater and Community Board member Helene Mountainer, and if I've missed anyone, I don't think I have, that's really good. I'm Ruth Dyson, the Member of Parliament for Port Hills, and that's for another 66 days guaranteed. And after that, that's democracy. We'll see how that goes after that.
No, you'll be right.
Oh, awesome. On our panel, we're very fortunate to have three passionate, talented and competent people who are talking about an issue that is of concern to everyone across the country, but actually nowhere more of concern than in Canterbury, and that's the issue of water quality. So can I thank you all for giving up your evening to present to us and stimulate some discussion. So the three of them are going to speak, and then we're going to have a pretty chatty conversation about things they've said and things they haven't said, because there might be some things they've missed, unlikely, actually. Kevin Hague, a friend to the environment and now Chief Executive of Forest and Bird, an organisation that stole him from Parliament. Their gain was our loss, but it's great to have you in that role, Kevin, and thank you for being here tonight. Pham was the highest polling Ecan councillor, having run an extraordinary campaign from Rowell Island, which is quite an unusual thing to do. It's tempting, but I'm not going to risk it. But you did really well, and he's alongside our other Ecan people have made a significant contribution in the just brief time that you've been there already. David Parker is a Labour Member of Parliament, our spokesperson for water and the environment, a long-term friend and colleague of mine, and somebody who's not just passionate about water, but passionate about the leadership role that is currently missing from central government. And I hope that leads into what you were going to say tonight, because there's certainly a big space to fill. So thank you again for coming along. Thank you to everyone who's here. I hope you enjoy the evening. I hope we all learn from it and that we leave more committed than ever to addressing the issue of water quality in our country. First speaker, Kevin, over to you.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā iwi o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Thank you, Ruth, for that very kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be here on such a distinguished panel to support my friend and former colleague, Ruth Dyson. So this is me. Someone asked, as we were warming up for the event, where this picture's taken. Any guesses? It's Lake Angeles in Nelson Lakes National Park, one of my favourite places. So I've been...
The shed's a great colour. Park's a great colour.
I've been Chief Exec at Forest and Bird now for 9 months. Forest and Bird, you won't be able to read that, I don't think, but so the Forest and Bird is almost 100 years old. We were established in 1923. Many of you, as I look out into the audience, I know are members of Forest and Bird. Anyone who isn't, well, it's just a suggestion. So the background of this slide is Kapiti Island. That was the genesis of Forest and Bird from this guy, Captain Valentine Sanderson. And over the years, we've been instrumental in many conservation victories. We have branches right through the country. We're the oldest and the largest of the conservation organisations, and we're independent. Forest and birders would say it's really important that we care for the environment and do conservation work because of the inherent value of nature. There are other people who say we should look after the environment because, in fact, human beings and nature are interlinked, and human welfare is dependent on healthy ecosystems. But this slide is here to demonstrate that there's another perspective as well, that even from a flinty-hearted economist's point of view, looking after nature is important because actually pretty much everything that we sell on the world stage, in this case milk powder, and I'm sorry this is so washed out, this is actually from Fonterra's website, and this is how it was on the website. Everything that we sell, milk powder, tourism, films, aluminium, joinery, it all is sold on the back of this idea of a clean, green, 100% pure country in which the environment is taken care of. And this slide actually suggests to the world's milk powder buyers that we have a dairy industry that operates in harmony with nature. You won't be able to see it, but in this paddock at the bottom, which has the lowest stocking ratio of any dairy paddock I've ever seen, there's even a little Pohutukawa tree, which I'm guessing probably would have gone when the pivot irrigator went round the first time. We're here to talk about fresh water, and here are two of the big trends. So the nitrogen balance has worsened enormously in our freshwater systems, and we have, in human terms, a huge rate of waterborne illness. And the human connection is important because that is the thing that's starting to get people to understand that our freshwater is in crisis. We're not talking about quantity, but there are a whole lot of quantity issues about freshwater as well. Over-allocation, mainly for irrigation, and an imbalance in the way that water consents are issued and administered. So, as an example of the crisis affecting our freshwater and the ecological health of our freshwater systems, here are the numbers for the species that are sliding towards extinction. And I draw your attention particularly to the 72% of our native fish that are sliding towards extinction. There's one fish that is protected. It's the greyling, a fish that is already extinct. 4 out of 5 of the species that are eaten as part of whitebait patties are at risk of extinction. We are the country in the world that has the greatest proportion of our native species sliding towards extinction. There is a crisis in biodiversity and a crisis in freshwater. And that crisis emerges through habitat loss, but also habitat degradation. And if Minister Smith were here, he would be saying, yes, there is a problem in our rural areas, but there is also a problem in urban areas, and it's wrong to point fingers, and it's everyone's problem, and that's true. But it is mostly a problem around agricultural practice. And I don't know if you're aware of the tactics of the tobacco industry from the 1950s. 1957, first major epidemiological study that proved without a shadow of a doubt that smoking tobacco was associated with lung cancer, Dole and Hill. And what the industry did at that time was adopt a strategy that was about trying to confuse the science, saying all of the time, well, there's some evidence, but there's evidence both ways, and we just need more science, we need more research. Actually, in the years subsequent, the same tactics have been used by the alcohol industry, they're now being used by the oil industry and the coal industry to try and resist doing something about climate change. And they're also, the same tactics are being used by the big irrigators to actually try and stop us doing something about freshwater quality. But the science is clear. OECD, Peter Gluckman's report, Ministry for the Environment report, how many more reports do we need before we actually take decisive action? This is from the OECD report. What the OECD report was saying, extraordinarily actually, given the sort of mainstream nature of this huge international institution, was that there's actually a fundamental problem in the New Zealand economy. That the environment of which the economy is a subset is finite. It has fixed limits. And the New Zealand economy is now bumping up against those limits. So if you want more economic growth, and there's a debate about that of course, but if you do, then you have to change the fundamental nature of the economy because it cannot be based on extracting more resource. And it goes to this fundamental problem of the mismatch in the relationship between economy and environment. We have a model in this country, and actually through much of the world, that sees the environment as the raw materials or the waste disposal for the economy. The economy is treated as, the superior. Actually, it should be the other way around. We should set our environmental goals and our social goals and make the economy serve those. So government's response to some of these freshwater issues. This is their report that set out the draft changes to the National Policy Statement on Freshwater. Clean water it's called, and then the subtitle is 90% of rivers and lakes swimmable by 2040. So picking up on the public's concern about swimmability. Now, Forest and Bird likes, one thing that's in the draft NPS. So regional councils will be required to monitor what's called the Macroinvertebrate Community Index. It's just a measure of really sort of the amount of life that's in a waterway. What we don't like are the thresholds that are in this report because they are set at toxic levels. So you could do all of the things that are in this NPS and still have toxic rivers. We also oppose the specific conditionality of everything in the NPS on economic cost. So you do all these things to improve the environment, but only if it doesn't damage the economy. And we need a bottom line for the NCI. There isn't one. We need standards for nitrogen and phosphorus, and we need to deal with groundwater. The swimming target, non-binding, it only applies to large rivers and lakes. I'll show you what that means in a moment. The E. coli standard is set too high, which goes to the bottom point of whether the standards are actually better or not. Actually, it's largely about shifting the goalposts so that a river that is today classified as only wadable gets redefined as swimmable in this draft statement. And the time frame is far, far too slow, 2040, when we're dealing with a crisis. So here's what I mean by large rivers and lakes. Here's Taranaki. The rivers, the waterways to which the swimmability standard will apply are shown on this picture in blue. Those to which it will not apply are shown in red because they're too small, says the government. So, in fact, only 10% of our waterways actually meet that standard of large rivers. So when the government says 90% of rivers will be swimmable, they mean 90% of 10% of the rivers. There is a stock exclusion target, but it's very weak. And this relates to New Zealanders' perceptions of the environment. So in this diagram, it's far too detailed for you to see, but Ken Huey from Lincoln University has been monitoring New Zealanders' perceptions of the state of the environment this line up the middle, that's the neutral point. Everything to the left is a negative perception of the environment. Everything to the right is a positive perception of the environment. So what this diagram shows you is that for almost all of these indicators, marine fisheries, natural environment in towns and cities, wetlands, of which we've lost 90% by the way, groundwater and so on, all of those other things, New Zealanders think that the environment's actually in good shape. They're completely wrong, but that's what they think. Forest and Bird is setting out to try and change that perception in this year. There's an election on. The one issue where there has been some cut through has been freshwater, rivers and lakes, where around 50% of people think actually things are not okay. Now this data was gathered last year. I'll bet if we were to take the same questionnaire right now, that would have grown. Because New Zealanders really care about this and we're getting it wrong. So what Forest and Bird is saying is that there is a crisis affecting nature in freshwater. You know, when 72% of our native fish are at risk of extinction, that is a crisis. We're making it up for grabs. So you'll be aware that in many places around the country, that regional councils are failing to do the job of protecting this. There is agency capture, and there are some solutions. Here are some organisations who've got together to find some solutions. You may have heard of the Freshwater Plan. It's a plan that's endorsed by the Tourism Export Council, Fish and Game, Federated Mountain Clubs, the Trampers, World Wildlife Fund, the Public Health Association, Choose Clean Water, the Federation of Freshwater Anglers, Greenpeace, Ora Taiao, which is a health sector organisation, Forest and Bird, kind of the main mover in this plan, the New Zealand Recreation Association, Action Station here, that many of you will know, Eco, which is the big collective organisation of environment and conservation organisations, Pure Advantage business organisation, Whitewater NZ, and the one with no words in the bottom left is the Waitaha Grandmothers Group, who are setting out to protect waterways on the west coast. That's who we've got at the moment. This collection of organisations is going to get bigger than this. And this is the plan. The National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management has got to have strong bottom lines for human and ecological health. We have to end the public subsidies for further irrigation and instead invest in an agriculture transition fund. So this is the idea of just transition, actually moving people away from harmful industries into helpful industries, but doing so in a way that fairly shares the benefits and costs of that shift. We need to decrease cow numbers immediately. And we're at a stage where Nathan Guy, Minister of Agriculture, is saying, well, we're not going to be able to increase the cow numbers very much more. Yeah, that's true. We actually need to decrease them. We need to decrease them now. We actually needed to decrease them some time ago. We need a polluter pays system. We need to increase regional council reporting and accountability so that actually everyone is accountable to a national standard and there isn't the regional variability. And we need to adopt this OECD recommendation to establish a whole-of-government, multi-stakeholder process to develop a long-term vision for the transition of New Zealand to a low-carbon, greener economy. That's the OECD saying that. So I've got more detail on each of those, but we won't go through that because despite my galloping, we're still out of time. So this is what Forest and Bird is saying this year. We're asking New Zealanders to vote for the planet. So we're here at a Labor Party meeting. Forest and Bird is going to be interested to see what Labor has to say about this. So looking forward to David's presentation. And that's it. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so I don't have any slides, so I'm wondering if I should, would this be distracting, or should I just leave that there?
Oh, that worked.
Okay, I'll just leave it there.
Just put the lid down.
Okay. No, it'll probably come back.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Kevin, and thanks, Ruth and the Labor Party, for inviting me to be part of the conversation this evening. Can everyone hear me at the back? You can. Great. Louder. Okay. So kia ora tātou, my name is Pham, and I guess I have both the privilege and the challenge of being one of your elected regional councillors for Environment Canterbury. And just to be clear from the outset, I'm not here representing Ecan tonight. I'm speaking from my own point of view as your councillor, because I have gotten into a bit of trouble in the past for that. So I must add a really big thanks to everyone here who voted for me. For the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you really a bit of a brief life story around freshwater, and then briefly frame the key issues around water, which I think are in dire need of central government leadership. And then hand over to David, who I'm sure will have all the solutions to our problems. So just for a bit of background, I originally hail from the North Island. I grew up in Wellington, swimming in the Hutt or Hiratonga River and various haunts around Greater Wellington and the Wairarapa. I really started my freshwater or environmental journey with a Bachelor of Science in Ecology at Massey, where it was first our unique and quirky but increasingly rare native freshwater fish that first got me interested and engaged in environmental issues. Now, I must admit, before that, I grew up really knowing nothing about native freshwater fish. I actually thought trout were native, which is no wonder really when you consider that our native fish are most commonly encountered fried as a whitebait patty. So just for a quick native fish 101, and I'm glad that Kevin, focused in on our native fish, whitebait are actually the juveniles of 5 amazing different species from a family of fish called the galaxids. And these galaxids were named after the galaxy of the stars because of their beautiful gold, sparkly patterns that adorn their bodies. And we actually have 28 species of galaxids which are native to New Zealand. And out of those, a whopping 86% of them are endangered. So that's not including all the other freshwater species like eels and bullies, which make up that horrible 72% endangered. The galaxids are doing even worse off. So over the last decade now, I've been working with native fish and the communities in which they remain, initially for DOC in Otago, but eventually I got pretty sick of essentially smiling sweetly while I watched populations go extinct. So I returned to uni and completed my Masters in Freshwater Ecology and a little bit of resource management law. And I went on to start a charitable organisation called Working Waters Trust, where our main focus is working with communities around really endangered native fish populations. And our projects cover Canterbury, Otago and Southland, where I've been working with landowners, schools and community groups on restoration projects on primarily private land since 2013. And it's been great. But increasingly I was realising, what is the point of working in these little restoration bubbles when over the fence, there's more land being developed, more environmental degradation, and we weren't actually able to address those wider pressing issues. So I started getting involved in water management in Canterbury, firstly through the zone and then the regional committees. And these are basically joint committees which are responsible for making local recommendations about water at a local level. And I became increasingly concerned about the decisions that were being made as part of this collaborative model. And therefore, I really felt like I had a responsibility to try get involved at a high enough level to really have some influence in the decision making. So I ran for Ecan last year, like Ruth mentioned, whilst marooned on Rao Island in the Comedics. So Rao Island is halfway between New Zealand and Tonga. It's the right way going north. And I was there running the biodiversity and science contracts for DOC, Met Service, GNS Science, and Scripps Institute, which is a research institute in California which runs global carbon monitoring programs. And long story short, thanks to the wonderful People's Choice team who were here on the ground in Christchurch putting up billboards and giving out flyers while I was living a life of paradise on Rao Island, making campaign videos, I was elected to council alongside my wonderful People's Choice colleagues, Steve Lowndes and Cynthia Roberts, who are here tonight. So we came into council last October, and we're sort of in this semi-democratic mishmash of a structure, which is a result of the government sacking the elected council in early 2010, for reasons that I won't speculate on now. And they appointed commissioners who governed Ecan and continue to govern today as part of our new structure, where we now have 6 government-appointed councillors, 2 of whom are elected by Ngāi Tahu, and 7 elected councillors like myself. And the idea with this structure is to transition us back to full democracy in 2019. So I mentioned before that I felt like I had this responsibility to, try get to a high enough level where I could influence decision making. And I guess now that I'm on Ecan, it's been a bit of a wake-up call for me that the tools, or really lack of tools, in our guiding legislation, like the Resource Management Act and the Local Government Act, provided for by central government, are absolutely critical in ensuring that we on regional council can actually fulfil our roles in sustainably managing our precious resources. And I'm just going to touch on some examples that I hope we can talk about more this evening, where strong central government direction is urgently needed. So the first, no surprise, it's water quantity. In Canterbury, over half of our water catchments, be that ground or surface water, are over-allocated, and some are over-allocated by over 300%. We must reallocate these over-allocated catchments. It's really the bare basics in responsible management, and it's an issue that's right across Canterbury and actually New Zealand. Where regional councils fall short in this area, though, is that we currently don't have the tools to adequately address over-allocation. So essentially our tools, we've got 2 tools, which really came to light last summer when the Selwyn or Waikirikiri dried up. And one of our tools is water shortage directions under the Resource Management Act, which are totally ineffective because it basically means once the river's dried up and the aquifers are depleted, we can call a water shortage direction where people need to stop abstracting water for a period of 2 weeks. So it's really ambulance at the bottom of the cliff stuff, and it's not going to get us anywhere. Our other tool is consent reviews, but we can't call in consents as a group. We actually need to review each consent individually, which can really basically cause regional councils to be in the courts for years and result in court costs which run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, which then as a result may or may not result in equitable allocation changes. So there's lots of room for improvement there from central government. The second big issue which Kevin's touched on a lot, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but it's of course water quality. And the latest iteration of the National Policy Statement for Fresh Water, which has been set by our current government, is vastly inadequate to protect either human or ecosystem health. And this matters at a regional level because it's the limits in that document which set the bottom lines for our collaborative discussions that we have on this local level. If central government actually set stringent limits in the NPS that had real, tangible environmental outcomes, then that would provide clarity for our communities that we simply cannot afford to collaborate on environmental limits. Water charging or resource rentals has been a hot topic and one that I think is absolutely critical for our next government to address, where ideally the profits would be redirected back into the regions for freshwater improvement and regeneration, and I'm sure we'll expand more on that later. Properly assessing externalities is a big issue which I'm trying to get progress on with our council at the moment. And externalities are the cost of any economic activity, which then the costs are borne by society. And we've really failed abysmally in adequately accounting for the cost of externalities like water treatment costs, the costs borne by health impacts like gastro diseases, greenhouse gas emissions, changed recreational values, as well as the cost of environmental repair and restoration. I feel we must broaden our economic focus and really lift our gaze from these short-term economic considerations where we just look at something narrow like GDP and really raise, our vision to true long-term economic sustainability where we do factor in externalities into our decision making. Because what we've really failed to grasp is that if it's environmentally unsustainable, it's already economically unsustainable. And the last issue, and boy, it's a big one, is climate change. So the more I've learned about freshwater and environmental decline, the clearer it's become that both our challenges and our solutions around climate and freshwater are inextricably linked. Sure, it was some funny looking native fish which first got me engaged and interested in this area, but the more I've learnt about the reality of climate change impacts, the more I've come to see biodiversity as almost a luxury. What really concerns me and keeps me up at night are the bare basics in environmental management. Are we going to have clean drinking water in 10 or 20 years? Are we going to have soils where we have options for growing crops or pasture in the future when we can no longer rely on synthetic fertilisers? And those questions are increasingly hard to answer in light of projected climate impacts, where climate variability and inconsistencies are really our world's new normal. Unfortunately, with our current government's lack of tangible action, New Zealand's greenhouse gases continue to rise, and per capita we're amongst the highest top 5 emitters in the OECD. Our emissions trading scheme is shonky, based on phony Ukrainian carbon credits, and it's been discredited internationally. It also excludes agriculture, which is our biggest emitter, making up 49% of New Zealand emissions. And despite opposition from councils and iwi groups around New Zealand, our government continues to offer up swathes of our ocean and our land for oil and gas exploration. So there's much opportunity there for a government who firstly understands how reckless it is to ignore this issue, and secondly, really moves on the policy front and with urgency. At a regional council level, our ability to put effective policy measures in place to prevent climate change is limited. The resource management currently limits local government to adaptation. So in other words, we can plan for the seas to rise or the pests to get out of control, but we can't actually put in steps to reduce emissions to stop that happening in the first place. This is a completely irresponsible approach, and local government needs a mandate from central government that not only allows but requires us to mitigate against climate change through tools like limiting stock numbers. And it just so happens that such a legislative tool would also help address the ongoing pollution of our waterways. Win-win. So I've briefly outlined some pretty massive challenges for you, David. But like any big challenge, they come hand in hand with even bigger opportunities. For our leaders, be they local, regional, national, our freshwater and climate change realities allow us to make decisions which will have benefits that cross our imagined economic, environmental, social and cultural divides, and plan for a new world which actually thrives within planetary boundaries and acknowledges that true human progress is in step with our environment. I'm really looking forward to being part of a growing number of Kiwis who vote this September to elect a government who seizes that challenge. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of the conversation tonight. Thank you.
I've got a small announcement. There's a car in the car park with its lights on. Its number plate is GAS 602. I haven't been told what model it is, but those of you who, one of you it appears. GAS 602.
Hey, can I first thank my colleagues on the panel here? Those were both fantastic presentations and quite inspiring. And thanks everyone for coming out tonight. I'm going to say a few things about myself, then show you some examples of some truly appalling farm practice, which is all too prevalent from the north to the south of our country. And then I'm going to talk about some of the solutions. I'm not actually anti-farming. I actually don't think many people here are anti-farming, even though critics of some farm practice are sometimes presented as being anti-farming. I'm a co-founder of A2 Corporation and various other companies that rely upon agricultural enterprises. I'm also lucky that I bring some decades of experience in water law. In the 1980s, when I was a young lawyer, I was trained with who I think was New Zealand's best water lawyer at the time, Jim Guthrie. I was a junior on the Rakaya water conservation case. I appeared as sole counsel on conservation orders, a lot of them. The Mataura River, the Wakatipu, all of the tributaries, you know, the Rees, the Dart, the Lockie, the Vaughan, the Kawara, parts of the Nevis. I did the Ahuriri water conservation order. I do know my water law. I've also acted for miners and developers. I know all sides of the equation. I love water. I use water. I ski in the backcountry and downhill. I swim in our rivers. I go eeling in our rivers. I go floundering in our estuaries. I occasionally fish in the sea. I occasionally get out there fly fishing, walking alongside our rivers. I'm a terrible surfer. I float my kids down rivers on tyre tubes. And all of the rivers that I used to swim in when I was a child are dirtier than they are now. And I find it so tragic that in this wonderful country where we have some of the most special rivers in the world, that they are degrading before our eyes. Not many of us realise how special our rivers are. Not many countries are as steep and young as ours are. We've got these steep rivers that drag gravels down from the Alps across these alluvial plains, and therefore when we are in them, they're these beautiful, when they're clean, habitats of these round stones that we can walk on, this beautiful habitat for eels and for the galaxids and the macroinvertebrates, and for people to swim in and enjoy. And we're ruining it. And I find it so sad that with all of my experience in life and my power as a politician, I have not yet failed to arrest that decline. And I will feel that I have failed in my duty as a politician if by the time I leave politics, I haven't helped turn it around and get it going in the next direction, in the right direction. What's happened to our rivers as a consequence of increasing intensification of land use is partly a consequence of changing economics. The Uruguay rounded the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the World Trade Organization agreement, capped the amount of subsidised dairy product that could be sold by rich countries into developing countries. And for a period of over a decade, there was a cap on there was no ability to increase subsidised exports from countries like Europe or the United States into growing protein markets, particularly in Asia. And during that period, New Zealand was the lowest cost unsubsidised producer of increased output. It coincided with new technologies like K-line irrigation, more efficient pumps, these big centre pivots, fertiliser trucks, and combine all those things with the higher dairy price, and there was this explosion of conversion of land into dairy. Now, you can forgive regional councils for being swamped by that for a while, but at the very latest in 2004, when Morgan Williams' PCE produced his report, Growing for Good, it was clear that we had a problem with unsustainable nutrient and effluent loads into our rivers. And since then, the incompetence and negligence of regional councils is unforgivable. And I do disagree with you on this point, Lan. We do need more guidance from central government, but since the RMA came into force in 1992, the regional councils have had full legal authority to set minimum flows and to have rules relating to the pollution of our rivers, and they failed in their duty. With this river here, this is one of my favourite rivers these days. This is the Manihirakia. I go camping up by this. This is a gorge near Omakau. There's a very short reach of river from where this river comes out of the mountains and the Hawkdens and the St Bathans range, goes through a little, and that's virtually all now in a conservation park, goes through a relatively short area of agricultural, increasingly intensive agriculture because you're wintering of cows and things there, and then goes back into gorges. When I used to take my kids there when they were tiny infants about 20 years ago, you didn't question whether you could put your head under. Now you go back there and you think, oh, I'm not sure. I still do, but I've seen that one degrade. Not as bad as what's happening in the Hawke's Bay. This is what I call these battery beef lots. This here, and these are proliferating in the Hawke's Bay. There's not a blade of grass to be seen here. There are about 300 or 400 enormous dairy bulls here. They have all their feed brought to them, and there is no adequate control of what happens. You look through here on the... Is there a pointer on this? I don't know. Probably not. They've got a pretend sedimentation pond here, and you have a rain event, and what happens? Well, this spring-fed creek here changes colour from blue. That rises very close to here, that creek. There's another beef lot above, but I'll just show you what happens to this pond here. Everything comes through here. Look at all the sediment on the side of this and the effluent here. And it goes into this creek, which changes from blue just up there to brown. That's the same creek further down there, and it goes to the river. It goes to the Tuki River. The Tuki River is a big river. You've got to pour a lot of shit into the Tuki River before it is too dirty to swim in, and now it is. That's another photo. That's actually the photo of the beef lot further up. Sorry, it's a bit grainy. I took this one. But these cattle are only not going deeper into that dirt because they are standing on alluvial gravels underneath that dirt. The hypocrisy, look at this, the regional council safeguarding your environment, showing us swimming holes there that people can no longer safely swim in summer. I went to that one there. I went back there a couple of weeks ago to see if anything's been done because I publicised these photos a year ago. Has the regional council done anything about it? No. This winter, exactly the same. I'm disgusted by this sort of practice. Here goes another one. Right by the river. Look at that. Where can the effluent and the nitrogen from those cows go? It can only go to 3 places. There's no vegetation taking up. It can only go to the groundwater, the air, or the streams. It's disgusting. Look at this one here. How can we allow this in New Zealand? Look at this one. No wonder most of these are in the command area of Ruataniwha. Why do they think that people don't trust them on the increasing intensification of land use that will be necessary to make the economics of Ruataniwha work? I'm going to go down to the other end of the country, the Mataura River. There's been a conservation order on this river since about 1987. I did it. Look at this. Regional Council still not controlling the access of beef cattle to the river. What do? They do this. This is a photo by a fisherman friend of mine, Dougal Rulstone, who sent it to me, just a couple of months ago. These next photos are all of the Ariti River catchment. The next ones I'm going to show you, the first ones I'm going to show you, are this stream called the Otapiri Stream, which is a mid-reach stream. It's not high country, it's not low country. And you've got these what we call riffles and pools. And we've got data going back a long time on how many macroinvertebrates there are. These are the little critters here, and if these little critters aren't there, there's nothing for the fish to eat, whether they're native or introduced, or the eels. 1964 to 2016, more than a 90% decrease in macroinvertebrates in the riffles. In the pools, they're dead. 99% of them are gone. Look, ostensibly, it looks reasonably clean. You think, oh, that doesn't look too bad, till they do one of their scientific shuffle tests, and you see the silt that's come up, and you can't see the tile they put in. This is what happens when you look through it at the bottom, looking through it. That's what the bottom of it is covered with. It's just covered with silt and other things. This is higher up in the same catchment. This is deer being break-fed in winter. These are all taken by Zane Moss of Fish and Game Council Southland, and they're all taken from roadsides, and at his feet are streams. Look at this. This is winter cows being wintered on crops, straight into the stream. There goes another example. What's happening at the estuary? So you go down to the end of the river and you get to this estuary. This estuary is right by Invercargill. This is Ariti Beach. 2000. You watch the change colour and the change in the weeds. 2006, filling up with mud. 2011, and weed. It's actually beyond short of oxygen now. It's becoming quite poisonous down there. And that's 2014. It's pooted. The cockle beds are dying. Actually, in some of these areas here, the cockle beds are under that much silt now. They're not just dead, they're covered. And most of the estuaries in Southland are now like this. Fort Rose around the Mataura, it's not as bad of them, but they've got these problems. The Aparima is like this. The Ariti's like this. Disgusting. And then out to sea, we know, I talk to fishermen complaining about how they've ruined all the inshore fishery, and they say, kelp beds are dying out to sea because there's not as much photosynthesis, so they're not thriving to the same depth. Well, we all know about Coes Ford. It's disgraceful. I think we need an inquiry as to what's gone wrong here. I really think we need to get to the bottom of this. I'm not going to point the finger at current councillors or recently appointed councillors, but there is something seriously gone wrong here, and we need to get to the bottom of why that was allowed to happen despite the full authority of the regional council having the ability to stop that if they'd wanted to. I've seen reports blaming this on climate change. I think that is bullshit. I think most of the problem here is because you've got the Selwyn River has always gone to aquifer and then come out of aquifers. It's always gone to ground in parts. Other people will know more about this than me, but some of the hydrologists have spoken to me, have said that there used to be quite a correlation between flows higher and flows around Coes Ford. Even though it went to ground in the meantime, what's happening now, according to some of these hydrologists, is that the aquifer has been drawn down, so in a dry year it doesn't flow out lower down in the way it did. And then, of course, we know what it looked like this last summer. They probably came from the press originally, those photos. Spray and pray, the latest bloody tragedy. This is in the Wanganui River. A farmer took me up there because he was disgusted with what was happening. Overflown with Andrew, Megan Woods. I didn't see you guys come in, sorry. Welcome. Overflown with Roundup or some other desiccant or defoliant. Then they oversow it, then they winter graze it, and it'll turn into a quagmire, and none of us can beat gravity, even these farmers. So you get a big rain event, whoomp, down into the Whanganui River. We need more wetlands and things. I won't go into too much on that. There is some bit of humour around this starting. You know, this is even some of the metropolitan sort of magazines. How about a Wairau River and Otaki cocktail, a perfect balance of nitrates, acidity and coliforms. This one here's my personal favourite. Come on in. The water is swimmable 85% of the time. And then this one here. What do we want for our rivers? Drinkable, swimmable, wadeable, horrible, flammable, fissionable. There is a public awakening, and I find it interesting that it took 13 years to save Manapori from 1959 to 1972, and it was an incoming Labour government under Kirk that saved Manapori. It's actually been a 13 years since Morgan Williams' Growing for Good report, and I think the people have had enough. And I think there is a considerable consensus across Parliament from the Greens, New Zealand First, ourselves, that we've got to do something about it. Now, what have we got to now? Well, I was out at Coast Ford today. Regional councils put up a sign. Careful with your dog around here, it might die. It's essentially what it's saying. Cyanobacteria. We've had the medical officer of health, Alistair Humphreys. We all have to stand up for that man. I know that he is under considerable pressure from the powers that be to shut up because they think he's being an advocate for something. He's actually just telling the truth. Andrew and I were speaking to him in Parliament recently when he was there as part of a Greenpeace complaint, when he said to us that he is being pressured to shut up, despite the fact that all he's doing is talking about the health effects of water with either too high nitrate levels or all these Campylobacter infections. We must protect him and the other public servants who speak out and do their duty. Nationals lost on this. The politics has moved. They couldn't get away with this wadeable standard. I went to Ecan last year, and Ecan made a valid point. They said that we're actually managing things to the wadeable standard that's been set by the government. Well, I actually didn't have to manage it to only that level. That I don't let them off completely off the hook there, but there's something in that argument. And so you actually need a standard that's better than swimmable. We need a new NPS on freshwater. It has to have as its most basic step the step required to stop things getting worse, which is that it can no longer be a permitted activity anywhere in New Zealand to have an increase in livestock intensity. You need a point of control to stop it getting worse. They had that available to them through the Judge Shepherd NPS. It had an elegant simplicity about it. It would have put that rule into all plans, and we need to do that even now to stop it getting worse, and we can stop it getting worse overnight. We then need to, and there has been some decent work done by law. The attribute tables that they've developed, for whether it's for nitrate levels or for phosphate levels or some of the other attributes, dissolved oxygen and the like, they've actually come up with the different criteria. It's just that the government has chosen on those scale of things, as Kevin has said, something that is just short of toxicity. If it was any worse, all the plants would be dying and the fish would be dying. They can't thrive under the levels that have been allowed, but they can exist. We actually need to do better than that. There are various other tricks in this. You can exclude test results for 20% of the time for the thing that they're looking at, which they focus in terms of swimmability on E. coli. 20% of the time, that could be from Christmas through to the 1st of March. Now, I don't know if they've been quite that cynical, but I actually don't trust them, given all of the other bloody tricks that they've had on the way through. There's one thing that I disagree with the plan that is put to us by the various organisations that want to clean up our rivers. I do not think that we should be putting money, that we should have to put the money that's in the irrigation fund into anti-pollution measures. I very strongly believe that we have to take a step in the sand in New Zealand and a step, a line in the sand, whether it's in climate change or water. You do not have to pay people to stop polluting, and you don't have to compensate them in any other way, whether it's, if you get that right, if you stop pouring pollution into the rivers, they clean themselves up. The estuaries don't, they take a long time, but the rivers very quickly do. So you need nutrient limits for every catchment. You need to be very careful that you're not just grandparenting existing levels of nutrient application, because otherwise you'll never get to the baseline you need quickly enough, and you'll cause unfairness between people who've got undeveloped land and developed land, and those who own most undeveloped land in the country are actually Maoridom. So you need to be careful that you don't prejudice Maoridom in respect of your allocation methodology. I've got copies of our water quality policy here, but one of the other really important things that you need to do is you need to prosecute breaches of the law.
Yeah.
Those photos that I showed you, I reckon just about every one of those was illegal. Sadly, not as many of them were as legal as was 10 years ago, because in the 10 years that the government's let everyone off the hook, a lot of regional councils have legitimised what was previously illegal, which really annoys me, and it's another reason why I'm pretty dark on a lot of regional councils around the country, and I'm not shy of saying so. In order to fix that, we've said that we're going to give either the Ministry for the Environment or the Environmental Protection Authority, we haven't decided which, a budget to prosecute.
Good.
We're not going to muck around with internal little solicitors at the MFE or the EPA. We're going to give them a budget to use local Crown solicitors up and down the country, and in addition to having a right to recover costs from the polluter, we're going to give them a right to recover all of their other costs from the regional councils who should be doing it in the first place. Because this should not be falling upon taxpayers, it should be being done by regional councils. I personally think that's a very important part of the solution. There are various other things. We're going to require the audit office annually to audit not just financial performance, which is what they actually concentrate on. They occasionally do an environmental performance audit, but more often they just look at the financials. Every year we're going to get the audit office to audit every regional council as to whether they're properly carrying out their legal responsibilities to protect fresh water. You know, since 2008, when the government could have stopped this getting worse overnight by adopting the Judge Shepherd NPS, I mean, there would have still been some increasing nitrate flows into aquifers for a while, but they could have stopped the out-of-control increases in livestock intensity. Since then, how many extra cows do you think we've had in New Zealand? It's 1 million. Each one of them produces the effluent equivalent to 14 people. That's like 14 million people crapping on the land, much of which has been getting into our waterways. And we wonder why it's got worse in the last 9 years. I've probably spoken enough. I'm happy to answer questions. That's the main thing. I also think we need a separate NPS on estuary and wetland protection. I know Judith Collins thinks they're smelly and doesn't want to do anything about them, but I certainly care about them, and so does the Labour Party. So I can promise you that if the Labour Party is elected, we're not taking prisoners here. I will personally feel I have failed in my duty as a politician, and I've been a politician now for 15 years. I'm more than halfway through my career as a politician. If I do not leave that place up there, having helped fix this problem, I will have failed, and I'm determined not to.
Whoa, can I welcome our leader, Andrew Little. Thank you for calling in, Andrew. I was hoping you'd finish in time to be part of this conversation. I know you care a lot about all the issues that we care about in Canterbury, and I know you've had a lot of comment from us about water, so you can hear some more now. And my next door neighbour, MP for Wigram, Megan Woods. Thank you, Megan, for coming along. It's great. So we've got a bit of time. Some people didn't have dinner before they came here and are probably going to be fainting with hunger soon. But let's just see how the conversation goes. We won't set a time, we'll just let it evolve naturally. Kevin and Lan and David, fantastic presentations from all three of you, thank you. Provocative enough to get all of you sparring with each other. But how about some audience participation as well?
Hey, William Stewart here, the guy that actually recorded that video. I just thought I'd make a quick note to possibly fend off some undoubtedly frequent comments I'm going to get about the quality of that video. I didn't actually intend to do any recording tonight. I was actually just going along to hear about the talk, but when I got there and I saw that they didn't have anyone that was going to be live streaming it, I thought that the content of the talk was sort of interesting enough and important enough that more people than just those in the room should get to hear what Labour and Forest and Bird and Ecan have to say on the state of our waterways and what they plan to do or think they can do about changing it. So that's why it was sort of very rough cut, a lot of footage missing, didn't use a camera, was just using my phone and a bit of a tripod stand, and yeah, so I've spliced this recording together. I know it's not great, but hopefully it'll serve to help get the points across and give you a starting platform for finding out more about these topics and hopefully pique your interest. I really enjoyed the talk, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the responses from our current government as to you know, what they plan to do or what excuses they have for the current state of our waterways. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.